Hey adventurers, welcome back to another episode of Underdark Cellars. Today we are, well, if you're anything like me, your TikTok feed has been inundated with a whole bunch of Epic Universe cast previews, and I want to go so bad. However, I cannot afford to go right now. The cost of flights and hotels and the pass itself and all the food, that's just not in the budget right now. So instead, there's 5 parks. We're gonna do all 5 for the next 5 weeks. First up is Dark Universe. Let's get started. First on the list is the Crimson Glazed Pork from Das Steakhouse. It's a char siu style pork belly with charred green onion, mashed potatoes, baby carrots, acorn squash, and maitake mushrooms. I tried to stick to a pretty traditional char siu pork marinade, but with the bloody theme in the sauce, I decided to include some blood orange zest and the juice of a blood orange. I did hit up a couple Asian grocery stores to make sure I got like the fermented red bean curd and the dark soy sauce. A dark soy sauce works better for roasts and stews. And then you'll see here, I'm just adding in the zest of that blood orange and the juice. And we're going to set half of this aside for the sauce for when we serve it, and half of it is going to go with the marinade. I also went ahead and got some pork belly. I divided it into 2 2.5 inch wide pieces. I also removed the silver skin. I didn't film that, or I did, but I just cut it out. And then I went ahead and scored the pork skin and also pierced the pork with a fork. And we're gonna let this marinate in the fridge overnight, at minimum like 8 hours, but I did, I think, about 24 hours. And like I said, I just set the rest of the sauce aside in a small container in the fridge for the next day. Alright, now to prep for the blood orange chicken sandwich. It's served with pickles, so of course we're making our own pickles. I chopped a cucumber and put some dill, crushed garlic, and black pepper cloves in a heat-proof container, made my brine, and I set that in the fridge overnight. We're also going to go ahead and marinate our chicken for the chicken sandwich in some buttermilk, smoked paprika, some Chinese 5-spice, and garlic powder with a little bit of salt, and we are going to just make sure this is nice and massaged and put that in the fridge. Next, we're working on the slaw for that blood orange chicken sandwich. I thought blood orange would pair well with some red cabbage and fennel, so I went ahead and chopped up the entire head of fennel along with that cabbage. And then there's some parsley in the photos, and then the no slaw is complete without some shredded carrots, so I went ahead and put that in there as well. Gave that a toss, and then I thought, you know what sounds good with this? Dill. So I added some fresh dill, and then I made my sauce. I just eyeballed a little bit of sugar, some mayonnaise, some apple cider vinegar, and gave that a toss. And then after I had done all of that, I added in my blood orange zest and tasted for seasoning. Moving on to the rolls for the blood orange chicken sandwich, we are using Cuttlefish ink. Now, I saw some comments about this at the park, and apparently it makes your bowel movements green, so I decided to skip the food dye part of it and go all natural. I do not mess with activated charcoal, since activated charcoal can interfere with medications that you take. So I went ahead and made this enriched dough with Cuttlefish ink, and we're just gonna let it rise, and then when it's ready, we're going to go ahead and cut it into 8 sections. I'm just showing you how I did this. Once we cut it into 8 sections, it is time to shape these. I just pinch them together, give them a roll in my hands, and then roll them on a even surface and set them on a silicone-lined baking sheet to rise for about an hour. And then once they have risen, we are going to take an egg and some milk, make a little bit of egg wash, and we are going to brush that all over these buns. We want them nice and shiny. And they look like they're gonna be gray, but trust me, they will be black when they come out of the oven. I think I'm definitely going to use this Cuttlefish ink again in the future. They just turned out so well. Look at them. They're gorgeous. All right, now we're working on the blood orange sauce. Now, it's just blood orange sauce on a chicken sandwich, so I'm thinking like a blood orange hot sauce. So I added some garlic, shallot, a habanero that I seeded and finely diced, along with the zest and juice of a blood orange, along with the juice of a navel orange. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of sugar, and we're going to blend this until it's nice and even. And then we are going to add in a little bit of red food dye because it's red on the photos. We're going to go ahead and add in a little bit of salt, get this nice and hot. And then it was a little hot for me. I added a little bit of honey and then I added a cornstarch slurry, and then we're going to move this back to the heat and let that thicken up, and you will know it's ready when you can do this on the back of the spoon. And then we're going to transfer that to a container to cool. Moving on to this red velvet death cake. It is a red velvet beet coffin cake, and I'm thinking that there's beets in there, but I have a family history with beets, and so I'm not going to be using those. So we're just making a red velvet cake. I'm combining my dry ingredients, and then I am going to combine my wet ingredients, except for the buttermilk, except I added a little bit, and then I was like, oh my gosh, no, I need to save that for later. So I added my wet ingredients together, and then once everything is, you know, mixed up well, we're going to alternate our dry ingredients and our wet ingredients. And you saw me add a little bit of white vinegar in there. You can omit it, but personally, I think it makes the red food coloring in your cake a little bit brighter. Red velvet cake is very subtle. It's not a very heavily chocolate cake, so you also need the instant coffee granules in there. Trust me, you don't want to skip them. So you're going to alternate your wet and your dry, and then we're also going to reserve some of the just brown cake batter before we add our food dye. We're going to spray down a sheet tray, or just like a cookie sheet, with some oil and our parchment paper, and then we're going to transfer our red velvet cake batter onto the cookie sheet. Make sure that's nice and even, and then we're going to give this a couple taps to drive up any air bubbles, and we're going to treat the undyed portion the exact same way. We're going to bake them for roughly the same amount of time, and then while the red velvet part cools, we're going to crumble the regular undyed part. Then I 3D printed a cookie cutter, which the STL file will also be included in the Google Drive down below, and cut out my little coffin shapes. I found this silicone mold with little skulls on it, and then I just heated up some semi-sweet chocolate chips and poured them into the molds, pressed them in with a knife. It's the next day. We're going to take the pork out of the marinade, put that on a parchment-lined baking sheet, and then we're also going to drizzle a little bit of that marinade onto the pork. While the oven finishes preheating, we're going to prep our squash. I'm using an acorn squash that I cut and cored, and then I realized I think I cut it the wrong way, so I cut it the other direction. We're going to pop the pork in the oven for about 15 minutes on a very high temperature, 475, and then after that we're going to lower it to 375 and cook it until it reaches 165 degrees. We're also going to toss the acorn squash and baby carrots in a little bit of maple syrup and Chinese 5-spice to tie all of those flavors together and put those in the last 30 minutes that the pork cooks. While that's happening, I'm going to peel some Yukon Gold potatoes and store those in a little bit of water just so they don't go brown. We're going to cut them into cubes, give the cat some pets, and then we're going to move on to charring our green onions. I went ahead and heated up my cast iron, and then I used this like press to really push the green onions into the heat and get that nice dark char. I didn't go all the way around. I just did about like 2 minutes on both sides. They're going to release a lot of water, and then we're going to chop these kind of rough and set them off to the side. Next, we're going to move on to actually making our mashed potatoes. So I'm salting some water, getting it pretty hot, and then we're going to cook these until they are fork tender. While those are cooking, we're going to also cut our French fries to go along with our blood orange chicken sandwich, and we're going to store those, you guessed it, in some water as well. This will make sure our potatoes are nice and crispy. Once the potatoes are done boiling, we're going to use a ricer to finely mash these potatoes. We're going to add in a little bit of butter, about a tablespoon, a splash of milk, and then we're going to mix that until it's all melted. Add in the charred green onions, some salt, pepper, taste for seasoning, and set that aside. Oh, look at them, they're so pretty. The pork is out of the oven. We're going to let that cool off a bit, and we're going to work on our garlic butter that will accompany our garlic pretzel dagger. So I'm making this super garlicky. I heard reviews that it was so garlicky you could taste it for hours. So we're adding like 5 cloves of crushed garlic and a couple tablespoons of garlic powder, some salt because I did use unsalted butter, and we're actually going to let that sit in the fridge for a while to let those flavors come together, so when we melt it, it's super garlicky. Now we're going to work on the pretzel dough itself. I'm going to activate my yeast and combine that in a stand mixer with some salt, butter, sugar, a ton of garlic powder, and bread flour. I'm using bread flour as opposed to all-purpose flour because I want these to be nice and chewy. We're going to let this come together for about 5 minutes in the machine. and get these like sick beats that I could not stop dancing to, which it works for me because the stand mixer was in the way, so you couldn't see my cringy dance moves. And then we're going to sprinkle our flour on a workstation and knead this a little bit longer so it comes together and it's a little less sticky. And then we're going to cut this, well, we're gonna roll it out first, but we're gonna try cutting this into shapes. Now the shape for the dagger is a little strange, and I kind of forgot a couple parts, but you see my first attempt there on the very right, and it's so bad. But I think this second one turned out pretty well, and that will be the only one that turns out well. Shaping pretzels is not my forte now. The most traumatizing experience of them all is the baking soda bath, and this is where things went very wrong. I do not have the tools to flip pretzels in baking soda baths. I was also not about to use lye because that's toxic, and look, it almost fell apart. I was able to piece it back together, thankfully. But at that point, I gave up on the baking soda bath for all of these. But you'll see the baking soda bath helps with the Maillard reaction. It helps with browning. So there's that. Now for this, we're moving on to the streusel topping for the cinnamon donuts. For the donut recipe, I am actually just using the recipe I made when I did the Laufen's donuts for the free run video. So that is the recipe we'll be using. You do have to bake the streusel topping because raw flour is what puts your health at risk, not necessarily raw egg like in cookie dough, raw flour. So we're going to bake that, and then we're going to make some cream cheese frosting. I did the batch for the donuts and the cake, but then I realized my camera was not in fact recording when I actually put the donut batter together. I also drained the chicken from the buttermilk, tossed it in the bag with some flour and additional spices, and then drained the potatoes and tossed them in a little bit of cornstarch and salt. Now we're just going to fry the donuts real quick. Again, the instructions are in the Laufen video. I fried the French fries for about 10 minutes until they were really nice and golden. They have a couple white spots because of the cornstarch, but they're so crispy, it does not matter. And then we're going to fry the chicken, and we're going to remove that from the oil. And then I believe it is time to plate. So we're going to start by melting some garlic butter. I added some fresh chopped parsley in there, brush that atop of the garlic pretzel, and then a dusting of fresh grated Parmesan cheese. And she is gorgeous. These were delicious, but I don't think I will be making my own pretzels at home again. It was very stressful. Next, we're going to do the donuts. I'm going to add a little bit of that streusel topping first, then some cream cheese frosting in a nice pattern like they serve in the park, and then some additional streusel topping on top, because that's where that goes. And oh my gosh, look at it. It's gorgeous. Next, we're moving on to that char siu pork. I'm going to do a scoop of those green onion mashed potatoes, place some veggies down, and we're going to start with our pork. You'll see she's so nice and juicy and tender. And then remember that sauce? We're going to pour some of that on top, and that's where we're going to get that bloody look. Oh my gosh, gorgeous. Ugh, this was so tasty. And then we're going to move on to our blood orange chicken sandwich. We're going to put those pickles down that we made, remember that, and a little bit of sauce on top of those pickles. We're going to add our fried chicken along with more sauce, and then we're going to add some of our coleslaw to the top of that, and then carefully add that bun and a little skewer to keep that from toppling over. Gonna add our French fries and then some more of that sauce to dip the fries in. This combo was so good. And then last but not least, we're going to do our coffin cake. So I put those brown cookie crumbles for the dirt, some Rice Krispies for the maggots, and then we're going to do cake, some cream cheese frosting, and little dollops all around the edge, cake, and the skull. Adventurers, this brings us to the end of the video. Every single thing I made was absolutely delicious. Recipes will be in a Google Drive file down below. Like, subscribe, share. Stay tuned for next week where we tackle the Nintendo Land, Nintendo World, Nintendo Land, the Nintendo part of Epic Universe. Please subscribe. I think that's it. So adventurers, do something nice for someone else, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.